The Ultimate Ninja Storm series is a collection of fighting games developed by CyberConnect 2 and published by Bandai Namco Games. From herein, I will be denoting the concatenation of the Ultimate Ninja Storm series as UNS, or referring to the colloquialism Storm when discussing singular or multiple entities. In regards to other abbreviations or jargon used throughout this text, they will be properly annotated with their appropriate definitions and descriptions so that the reader can grasp the breadth of the information being presented. On that note, the entries below attempt to cover as many relevant topics as possible, completely and concisely. To preface, an overwhelmingly large portion of this document will be dedicated to opinions that I've formed throughout several years of experience of playing the Storm games and participating in discussions regarding them. With that in mind, I will not claim these opinions are infallible or objective facts. The following is meant to educate the uninformed, inform the interested, and potentially even entice the uninterested into giving the Storm series a genuine and unabashed try.
Don't underestimate me!
The intention of the Storm games, in regards to their raison d'etre, does not elude anyone. Storm games serve as a way for Naruto and now Boruto fans to indulge in a world where they can play as their favorite characters and express their various idiosyncrasies to create a sense of immersion in the Naruto universe. The overwhelming consensus is that this best manifests itself through the story mode.
I didn't expect to find you this entertaining.
When playing the story mode of the Storm games, Naruto fans can vicariously live out the lives of a plethora of characters within the media and experience it from a non-spectator perspective. However, there are those fans that also wish to showcase their skills through the Versus feature present in free battle and online mode. Juxtaposing these two perspectives, we reach an impasse where it becomes challenging to appeal to both facets without prejudicing the other. From a developer standpoint, the choice becomes obvious. A utilitarian method solves the issue from a financial and moral position. Therein lies the newly born problem that has plagued competitive Storm players for over a decade. Will the developers ever cater to the second group of players without any resulting benefits? As in every game with a multiplayer function, competitive players emerge seeking to take their passion to another level. Storm's competitive scene has existed since the first UNS, with its roots in various forums such as Game FAQs, Arashi boards, Valor Gaming, GOML Gaming, and even VoIPs, voice over IP, such as Skype and now Discord. Throughout the myriad of Storm games that have been released, CyberConnect 2 has made an effort to at least attempt to balance them for both the casual and competitive multiplayer experience. This can be seen in the various mechanical changes made in sequels as well as balance patches that have existed since UNS 3, also known as Ultimate Ninja Storm 3. Regardless, as described previously and confirmed recently, CyberConnect 2 does not consider the Storm series a competitive fighting game and therefore does not treat it as such. With both the developers of the game and the majority of the player base not regarding the competitive scene as feasible, its future appears forlorn. Despite these roadblocks preventing the scene from flourishing, players have managed to create some semblance of competition primarily accomplished through tournaments, sets, and clan battles, a Storm version of Smash Crew battles. Ostensibly, these events resolve the issue of competitive players lacking a means to showcase their skills, but the innumerable dilemmas that surface as a result of poor communication, frenzied structure, and intrinsic game flaws lead to a nihilistic community with a severe loathing issue. Consequently, dogmas and myopic thoughts begin emerging and foster a self-containing greenhouse effect, further creating division throughout an already split-up community. The enthusiasm that the naive competitive player initially had slowly becomes disenchantment and even disillusion, feelings shared by all people involved in trying to reach a common goal, a similar absurdity to the fate of Sisyphus. The verisimilitude that the novice player once had dissipates and dissolves into deceit, spawning coteries of people who pontificate their groupthink within hive minds, that in turn leads to vapid and fruitless quarrels about arbitrary subjects including but not limited to gossips and rumors or conspiring to exploit others on the level of racketeering. Culminated, the community fails to accomplish anything and the resulting dissenting opinions lead to vacillation in overarching systems such as competitive rule sets.
It's almost unbearable, isn't it?
All of the cacophony caused by the Storm community's incessant complaining coupled with an inability to cease infighting amalgamate to create a stagnant group of people who, as a result, face relentless and unending mockery by outside sources that generate a positive feedback loop of self-hatred within the player base. At a rudimentary level, accusation of Storm's innate flaws and detrimental glitches or assertions that the game do not qualify as, quote, traditional fighting games, or even fighting games at all due to claims of the game's lacking combo complexity or a standard neutral/punish structure, seemingly shut down any prospects of a competitive future, but it does not have to be the end. Irrespective of these factors impending progress, the future of the competitive scene entirely depends on the steps taken by all parties involved. The bleak fate depicted should serve as a wake-up call for those sympathetic to growing the community as a whole. Finding an appropriate remedy to the countless predicaments that afflict the Storm player base holistically seems like an impossible task at face value. While the heads of the game, whether it be CyberConnect 2 or Namco Bandai Games, can easily appeal to a large majority, the active minority remains in the shadows, struggling to band-aid problems as they appear. Even though from a quantitative viewpoint it seems like a futile task, history has shown time and time again that an active and fervent few can shatter the mold enough to bring about change. Step by step, actions taken to improve the fundamental stability of the community slowly become more and more fruitful. As with anything that requires collaboration, communication serves as the foremost priority. An adequate network of communication between all relevant entities, including but not limited to, developers, publishers, competitive players, casual players, and content creators allows for efficient and accurate dissemination of information throughout all parties. The groundwork for this web already exists. Forms of media such as Twitter, YouTube, and Discord open the doors for anyone to contribute to the mutual goal of achieving a stable competitive scene. Although the lines of communication already exist, the community is currently stuck on the next step of ensuring that all, or at least a majority, of information spread corresponds to the truth. The organization step has befuddled multiple members of the community for years due to the reasons mentioned previously, but this document serves as a call to action and attempt to resolve the problem. Given the knowledge presented in this text, the ideal result comes from people applying it in their Storm-related discourse, for example, offering to inform someone unaware of Storm's neutral complexity via a Twitter reply. Once people become more informed, they can instruct others, which could lead to a revolution in the game's competitive state. As mentioned previously, the current status quo remains a dissolved and scattered set of communities that all ironically seek the same outcome, between the multiple Discord servers that fulfill the same goal or Twitter communities that fail to agree. Even though a utopia whereby everyone agrees and follows the same system is a pure ideal, the reality of division and chaos is not only inevitable but even beneficial to a small degree. Having others that disagree and demur preconceived notions introduces potentially new ideas and challenges possible dogmas that would induce close-mindedness. To conclude, these minor treatises only fantasize about the timeline of Storm. Pragmatically speaking, tangible actions and decisions have to occur for anything to actually happen. Addressing various deniers of the potential in Storm and outlining concrete measures that can be taken to advance the progression of the competitive community characterizes the heart of the rest of this text. Storm, at a glance, comes off as simplistic and repetitive. Initially, the metagame of the early Storm games relied on extreme defensive play to the point of timeouts becoming commonplace.
Let's just end it.
An uninteractive outcome that a lot of fighting game players attempt to avoid. Later, due to the multiple mechanical changes that CyberConnect 2 implemented, the metagame evolved to gain a chaotic and aggressive pacing that birthed the term mash and dash, similar to Call of Duty's spray and pray. These dichotic circumstances lead both player and spectator alike to believe that the shallow nature of the game results in uninteractive and low-thought matches where the winner either abuses broken mechanics better or happens to know more minor details that shift the tides in their favor. In turn, a low mechanical floor and even lower skill ceiling, alongside a borderline flat mental cap, turns the narrative into a completely unviable game. Storm becomes a party game. The reality, though, is that these perspectives lack true insight. They're generated as a result of ignorance of the unexplored profundity within the games. Almost by nature, the Storm series being three-dimensional automatically introduces an element of space that two-dimensional games cannot reach. A square cannot imagine the life of a cube. From a design perspective, that might convince an audience that semantically there is literally more depth, but with context, it's not nearly enough to draw a relevant comparison to 2D fighting games. 2D fighting games generally receive praise for their focus on neutral and punish, the two cornerstones of what makes a fighting game, alongside the mechanical complexity of executing proper spacing and combos. The conundrum that exists in identifying the Storm series as a proper fighting game lies in these two fundamental aspects. It becomes easy to view the Storm games as either having zero neutral and punish, or at best having a minimal and simplistic neutral and punish, when analyzed under the lens of abusing broken game mechanics. Fortunately, there exists redemption. The game's unbalanced risk-reward and seemingly irredeemable functionality surprisingly appear stable and counterable under intense scrutiny. In UNS 1, Ultimate Ninja Storm 1, as well as UNS 2, Ultimate Ninja Storm 2, the substitution bar present in modern Storm games did not exist, and the chakra bar, in homage to the Ultimate Ninja games on PS2, allowed the player to substitute. In a match in both of these two games, the amount of chakra a player had conserved practically always dictated the results. Spacing out supports, utilizing the movement options such as ninja moving, and making movement reads determined the better player. Alongside this, having the timing and instinct to execute a substitution, a 1 to 3 frame input where you press the guard button as an attack is going to hit, separated the wheat from the chaff even further. These two games primarily focused on the mental portion of fighting games. A large majority of the match takes place in the brain, and as a result, the physical and spectated gameplay simply does not readily appeal to the average viewer, as it does not invite any insane outplays or hype moments, though a seasoned player can easily recognize the difficulty in performing the mental maneuvers needed to win. as a simple and minor execution error can result in a barren and draining timeout, which shatters the mentally weak. Regardless, the spectator perspective is an undeniable and necessary aspect of the competitive experience, which future games ameliorated. In UNSG, Ultimate Ninja Storm Generations, the sub-bar was introduced, which resulted in creative punish situations and unique decision-making. Via sub-traps and the depletion of subs, UNSG remained a fairly defensive game, but the introduction of the Air Chakra Dash, which allowed a player to do the equivalent of an advancing normal at a nearly unreactable speed, allowed for further aggressive play.
He's gained incredible power through his training. The rest of this fight will likely be on an inhuman scale.
In this game, the puppet archetype remained the dominant characters like in previous games due to the G kunai mechanic they could utilize. It allowed for puppets to guard while throwing kunai, essentially enabling offense and defense at the same time. These characters effectively violated the state of the neutral and served as reminders that broken mechanics dictate the metagame of Storm. Nonetheless, with a simple enough ban implementation of the puppet archetype, normal characters became viable and a myriad of matchup as well as RPS, rock paper scissors, situations evolved. Whilst puppets versus puppets played their own system of neutral and punish, the normal character variation and rule set allowed for a more traditional fighting game experience. Calling out assists to apply pressure and impose 50-50s wherein the enemy has to either block or dash to deal with the oncoming pressure tested out the mental faculties of a player and pushed the limits of their reactions. An example of an RPS situation in UNSG would be in the Kiba Inuzuka vs Masked Man matchup, where the layer 0 option for Kiba in neutral would be to ACD, Air Chakra Dash, since his dog allows for 2 dashes, hence winning if Masked Man chooses the same option. For Masked Man, the layer 1 option, the option that would beat the ACD, is a U1, or J1 now, essentially meaning Jutsu, since that beats the Air Chakra Dash. Then, for Kiba, the layer 2 option is to simply jump block, reading that the Masked Man would U1, and therefore dodging it, as well as creating a whiff punish opportunity. Finally, Masked Man's layer 3 option would be to jump block as well, in which case nothing occurs, but the layer 0 option of Kiba Air Chakra Dashing beats this, hence the RPS. With supports, or assists, included in this basic RPS situation, various setups become unreactable or nearly forced, introducing issues of resource management and mental stack organization due to the risk of losing all substitutions. The following Storm games built upon this foundation and occasionally improved or worsened their respective mechanics. In UNS 3, Ultimate Ninja Storm 3, characters became far more unique with a greater identity. Although the neutral remained similar to UNSG, save for characters having much more expression, this also negatively impacted the neutral by introducing flowchart playstyles. The positives and negatives of adding and removing mechanics remained a trend in subsequent games, with UNSR, Ultimate Ninja Storm Revolution, introducing the counter mechanic that allowed for a massive punish upon a confirm. While the substitution bar can be viewed as similar to a burst mechanic in traditional fighting games, obviously ignoring that it can be used many times, it can still be baited, etc., the counter mechanic also exists in various other fighting games generally and is sometimes called a parry, though in other games this term means something completely different. The counter mechanic essentially compelled Storm players to pay massive attention to their position in neutral and also emphasize the importance of conditioning that was not as ever present in older games. In regards to the footsies of the game, counter situations could be forced by jumping, which would elicit a forced ACD and result in a guaranteed counter, meaning that approaches had to be more thoughtful and deliberate. The mechanic created an exceedingly large severance within the competitive scene, with some arguing that it allowed for too great of a punish for its resource cost. Before the patch, a player could kill off of one counter, and others arguing that the punish's severity forced a greater mind game. In UNS 4, Ultimate Ninja Storm 4, the switching mechanic was introduced, which held a lot of favor between casuals and competitive players alike. Being able to switch your characters on command provided casuals with the means to play as their preference in the moment, and added skill expression that it could not otherwise exist. In classic Storm fashion, various players began experimenting with the switch mechanic and found a way to reduce the risk-reward of its existence via switch tech. By timing your switch and chakra input, for example, the chakra cost would be refunded while still acting. Jutsu switch allowed for your character to do a jutsu at only the cost of half a support gauge. While this allowed for the mechanical skill ceiling to increase, in that switch tech inputs tend to be within the 1 to 6F range, several veteran players believe that the skewing of risk-reward ruined both the neutral and punish game of the Storm series. Still, there exists a neutral and punish game that takes an appropriate amount of skill and dedication to master. 50-50s in RPS situations still occur frequently, but resource management becomes far more important due to the safety net provided by switching. An example of an RPS and forced 50-50 situation that occurs in UNS4 that includes switching is as follows. Player 1 ACDs Player 2's JB, jump block. Now player 2 has frame advantage, meaning that their first hit would come out first, assuming both players press at the same time. Due to the existence of switching in this scenario, there exists a force 50-50 wherein player 2 can do a jutsu buffer, a switch tech where you can input a first hit combined with a jutsu on your original character. That in turn has to be read by player 1 in terms of their new character, as their new character's best options become dash or counter to check player 1's defensive options to the first hit using switches of their own. Although this probably sounds extremely convoluted and arcane on paper, players became accustomed to this war of attrition for frame advantage utilizing switches and in turn made UNS4 an extremely aggressive game, barring the zoning characters. Finally, UNSC, Ultimate Ninja Storm Connections, is confirmed to release on November 16th in North America. The game follows in the footsteps of UNS4 in terms of maintaining a lot of similar mechanics while also introducing a few such as crumples, restands, and modifications on characters' movesets. As of now, an in-depth analysis of the game's meta cannot be done, but there seems to be a greater focus on RPS due to the nerf to switching and the numerous chakra changes implemented. A scenario that often occurs is the dash clash situation, which happens when both players perform a full chakra dash, and following that dash class is an RPS situation where, generally speaking, the options are as follows: dash, counter, bait, in some form. Conclusively, this section may appear long-winded and complex, but it exists as a portion of information for anyone willing to garner more knowledge about the game and educate themselves further. Still, a lot of relevant information in specific situations are purposely omitted to maintain the focus on the neutral and punish of Storm games. After digesting all the details provided in the previous sections, a person must come to terms with themselves and determine the conclusion they choose to make given this information. Per the purpose of the document, the following will provide a basis or guideline for those interested in taking measures to further the growth of the player base and its exploits. Labeling humans often tends to overgeneralize, but for the sake of productivity, characterizations will be used to explore possible action plans. For casuals, helping new players who desire to become competitive and introducing them to the proper resources for growing as a player is a step that can be taken to assist in the growth of the community. Conversely, competitive players should consider the opinions of casuals when making decisions regarding any events or rule sets to be made. Casuals may not entirely know everything about the game, but they still form a large majority of the player base, and their opinions hold value for the simple reason of growing the community. Competitive players should also be joining tournaments and publicizing competitive events as much as possible with their peers, employing their knowledge to spread relevant information to new players and practically anyone involved as also of utmost importance. Content creators should continue spreading positivity and instilling hope regarding the Storm series among the community, albeit not facetiously and ideally with actual logic. Refraining from spreading misinformation due to ignorance is another ideal that should be followed, not only by content creators but by anyone who agrees with the tenets of this document, although it cannot be helped if it occurs on accident or as a result of past invalid knowledge. The greater community should continue to monitor player behavior and impose stricter rules on the player base. This may be difficult due to seemingly chopping off parts of an already small community, but will be necessary in the future if the game is recognized on a greater scale. Creating proper game rules for competition is something the community can assess via democratic voting or any organized convention. Developers and publishers alike, to CyberConnect 2 and Namco Bandai Games, should work together with the community, including content creators and players, to create a game that everyone can enjoy. Listening to feedback as they have done in the past without taking a bias towards the majority would also be optimal, but the factors discussed earlier may impede this goal. All in all, the call to action of this section should not be viewed as a forced directive nor a commanding order. They're merely possible actions that can be taken by all parties involved to concoct a mutually beneficial outcome. The actual classification of this document as a manifesto, tirade, discourse, or plea is irrelevant. The target audience is anyone passionate about Storm, fighting games, or the pursuit of information regarding various aspects of the player base and its constituents. Storm players might purportedly despise the game, but the continued livelihood of the player base and its chroniclers indicate the undying love they hold towards the series. Undoubtedly, the player base can strive towards making the game competitive, similar to the Super Smash Bros. Competitive community. The two communities may disagree on several topics and have points of contention, but the ultimate goal remains the same for both. Super Smash Bros. Melee was a unique game in that there was no online play at the time of its publishment, and all players had to test their mettle in offline play, which in turn led to a tightly knit grassroots community that still carries its torch for their predecessors. The Storm community may not have these specific prerequisites, but at the very least, they can be respected for their attempts at making something similar. The interests of all entities associated with Storm do not align in all aspects, but I truly believe there exists a future where at least a large majority of people involved can mutually benefit from coming together and working as a group. The pulchritude of what could be accomplished could pave the way for many games and communities to come. It may be a fool's endeavor, but in that case, I suppose a foolhardy main character instills a foolish, yet wondrous dream into their fans.